What would you do if your own child's wedding turned into a quiet threat against your name and your future grandchild? How far would you go, only using documents and truth, when your son's bride told you to buy a house or accept a lie that would destroy you? This is how I stayed calm, let everyone think I was weak, and then ended my son's wedding with one folder from my jacket. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Victor, and on the morning of my son's wedding, I felt older than my years. I stood in front of the church before most guests arrived. The air was cool, the stone steps were still in shadow, and there was a truck from the flower shop at the side. A young worker asked my name, checked a list, and then thanked me for the payment I had sent the week before. I nodded and said it was fine. He smiled and told me most fathers did not pay this quickly. I just said I liked things to be in order. Inside the church, the light came through colored glass and painted weak colors on the floor. I walked along the aisle, checked the flowers at the end of each row, and straightened one of the ribbons that had slipped. It was a small thing, but I wanted everything to look right for my son, Luke. For a moment, I imagined my late wife sitting in the front row, hands folded, eyes wet, proud of our boy. Instead, there was only my reflection in the glass of a side window, a man with gray hair, a simple suit, and tired eyes. I looked away. The photographer came in, dragging a large case, and asked where he should set up. I showed him the side door and the small room behind the altar, the one with the hooks for coats and the narrow mirror. He thanked me and asked if I was the groom's father. When I said yes, he told me I looked calm for such a big day. I told him I was used to big days. I had built bridges, stood on high platforms, and signed large contracts in my life. A wedding was different, but my body still knew how to stand steady in a storm. Soon more people arrived. Ushers in suits, the person from the church office, a few early guests. There was a soft noise of shoes on stone and the quiet buzz of polite greetings. I helped one older relative find the front row and answered the same 3 questions again and again. How old is Luke now? Where is the honeymoon? Did I feel proud? I said yes to all of it, but something inside me felt tight and unsure. Then Jenna's parents came. Carol, the bride's mother, walked down the aisle as if she owned the place. Her dress was bright, and her perfume reached me before her words did. Greg, her husband, moved slower, but with that half-smile he always had, like a man who knows a joke he plans to use later. Carol looked around the church and pressed her lips together. She told me the place looked smaller than she imagined. She said the pictures on the website made it look grander. Then she added that it was probably the best we could manage, and that at least the photos would hide the size. I said I thought it was beautiful. I had stood in many churches and halls in my life for funerals, baptisms, and weddings. For me, size did not matter. What mattered was what people said inside and how they behaved. But I did not argue. I never argued with Carol. There was no point. Greg clapped a hand on my shoulder. He said the main thing was the start the couple would get. He reminded me with a smile that a good start meant a good home. Then he squeezed my shoulder and said he was glad the house gift was almost official. I only said that the ceremony was the important part today. Greg laughed and walked away to talk to another guest, but I could feel his comment hanging in the air behind him. For a moment, I stood alone near the front row. I looked at the flowers again. I thought of the years I had spent paying off my own house, the long evenings after shifts, the arguments with my wife about saving every spare coin for the mortgage. We had painted every wall with our own hands. We had chosen every simple chair and shelf ourselves. That house was not just bricks to me, it was our history. Now it was a gift, people mentioned, as if they were talking about a bottle of wine. I moved to the side corridor where the small room for the wedding party was. I needed a moment alone. The corridor was narrow and cooler than the main hall. The walls were white, the floor plain. There was a bench under a window, and next to it a stand with a jug of water and glasses for the bridal party. I poured myself a small glass, even though the water was meant for them, and took a slow sip. I tried to calm my breathing. I told myself that I could survive some jokes and pressure. I had survived much harder things in my life. Harsh project managers, broken machines, wind on high scaffolds. This was only a family event. I heard quiet voices behind the door of the small room. There was the soft rustle of a dress, the higher tones of women speaking fast, the small sound of makeup tools on a table. I recognized Jenna's voice, even through the door. It always had a certain sharpness under the soft words. The door opened and one of the bridesmaids stepped out, almost bumping into me. She apologized quickly and smiled wide. She told me Jenna was almost ready and that she looked like a princess. I said she always looked nice. The bridesmaid laughed and hurried down the corridor, her shoes clicking on the floor. Then Jenna came out. She held the sides of her dress with her hands to keep it off the ground. Her hair was pinned up, and there was a small sparkle in it. She looked at me with a smile made for cameras. For a second, I could pretend she was just nervous and happy, like any bride. She walked closer and told me she wanted a private word before everything started. Her voice was soft enough that it would sound kind to anyone who happened to look at us. I nodded and stepped a little further into the corridor so no one would bump into us. She thanked me for all the help so far. She talked about the flowers, the catering, the support with some bills. She said she knew I had done a lot. I said I tried my best for Luke. That part was true. Then her face changed in a way only I could see. The smile stayed in place, but her eyes went cold and still. Her voice dropped a little, still soft, but flatter. She told me she wanted to be sure about the house. She reminded me that her parents and all their friends already believed I would give it to Luke and her as a wedding gift. She said it would look strange, even rude, if I did not confirm it soon. She said people would talk. I told her I understood that a home was important, but that a house was not a simple thing to give away. I told her Luke was still young and that there were many ways to help them slowly, step by step. I tried to keep my tone neutral, not defensive. I hoped we could leave it at that, at least for this day. She did not leave it. She leaned a little closer, still keeping her smile for the corridor. She spoke very quietly then. She said that once she and Luke had a child, everyone would see them as a perfect family. She said people would listen to any story she told about that child's father because she would be the mother, and mothers are believed. Then she said the thing that froze my hands and made the glass in my fingers feel heavy. She told me that if I did not make the house promise clear, she would tell everyone that the child was not Luke's, but mine. She said she would tell her parents first, then Luke, then anyone who asked. She said people would think I was a lonely man who had lost his wife and crossed a line, and that guilt would make me sign any paper she wanted. She said people would talk about me and my name, and about the child, and that this talk would never fully go away. She said all this in a flat, quiet voice, still with that same nice expression on her face. To anyone walking by, it looked like a warm talk between a bride and her future father-in-law. I did not answer right away. I could not. My body felt heavy, but not shaking. It was like someone had put a stone on my chest. I looked at her, and in that moment I saw her clearly for the first time without hope or excuse. There was no fear in her eyes. There was only calculation. I realized something else, too. She had thought about this plan before. This was not a sudden idea. She had decided she could use my age, my quiet nature, and my love for my son as tools. She believed I would be too afraid of shame to resist. I took a breath and set the glass down on the small stand. My fingers were careful. I did not want to break it. I did not want any loud sound. Then I told her, in a low voice, that this was not a topic for the minutes before the ceremony. I said the day was for her and Luke, not for property and threats. I used that word in my head, but not out loud. Out loud I only said pressure. I said I would think about her words and that my answer would be clear later. I did not say yes. I did not say no. I only promised clarity. She did not like that. I could see a small flash of anger cross her eyes. But the organ music started in the main hall, and someone called her name from inside the room. She had to turn back. Before she moved away, she told me quietly that this was my last chance to keep things simple. Then she walked back into the small room, and the door closed. I stayed alone in the corridor for a moment. My legs felt stiff, but I forced them to move. I walked out to the main hall, took my place in the second row on the groom's side, and sat down. People were standing, turning, whispering. The first notes of the processional filled the space. I watched Luke at the front, straight in his new suit, hands clasped, face bright. He looked so young from where I sat. My chest hurt in a different way now. I realized how much I had protected him from conflict all his life, how many times I had paid a bill or fixed a problem so he did not have to feel fear or shame. I wondered if I had done him a favor or harm. The ceremony started. I heard the words of the officiant but could not really hold them. They passed through me like wind. I saw Jenna walk down the aisle, slow and careful, everyone admiring her dress and her hair. I looked at her and now saw clearly the person who had just promised to destroy my name if I did not give her my house. Still, I stayed silent. I did not stand up. I did not shout. I had spent my whole life solving problems with plans, not with noise. Some old part of me woke up again in that moment. It was the part that had organized teams, checked structures, read contracts line by line. It told me to breathe and to watch. It told me to remember every word. They said their vows. The guests smiled and dabbed at their eyes. At one point, Luke glanced at me, and I forced myself to nod and give him a small smile. He looked relieved for a second and turned back to Jenna. When the ceremony ended and they walked back down the aisle as a couple, the guests stood and started to move toward the doors. People reached out to touch them, to offer quick words and hugs. The sound in the church grew louder. full of joy and small talk. I remained in my seat for a moment, letting the crowd move past me. I needed space to think. My mind was not empty, but it was strangely calm. There was fear, yes, but also a kind of cold clarity. I knew now that I could not go on as before. I could not be only a quiet wallet. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I almost ignored it, but the feeling of it was sharp in that noisy hall. I took it out and looked at the screen. There was a message from a number I had not seen for several years. It was from Mr. Patel, my old colleague who had become a property lawyer. He had written a simple line, asking if I still wanted to talk one day about those house papers. I once mentioned to him after my wife passed away. I read the words twice while the guests poured out of the church doors around me, and my hand closed slowly around the phone. To explain how I reached that day in the church, I have to go back a few years, to a time when I still thought effort and quiet support were enough. For most of my life, my world was simple. I was a civil engineer. I worked on bridges and roads. I liked clear numbers, strong lines, and plans that matched reality. At home, it was just my wife, our son Luke, and me. We had our house, bought many years ago, with long evenings of extra work and careful saving. When my wife passed away, it was like the house became smaller but heavier at the same time. Every chair, every picture, every mark on the wall carried her voice. I kept everything as it was, more or less. It made me feel like she was still part of it. Luke grew up and moved out. At first, he lived in a small shared apartment near his college. He studied business and liked to talk about brands and markets. I did not always understand everything he said, but I could see he enjoyed his world. When he was short on money, he called me. I helped with rent, books, and later with the down payment for his car. I told myself that it was normal. Parents help their children. I did not think back then about limits. I still remember the day he first mentioned Jenna. I was at work, in the break room, with a plastic cup of coffee in my hand. The room smelled of dust, paper, and strong light from the old tubes on the ceiling. My phone rang, and I saw Luke's name. He sounded excited. He said he had met someone special, a woman who worked in marketing. He said she was clever and social, and that she pushed him to be more ambitious. I liked the sound of that. I told him that if she helped him grow, then that was good. Months later, I met her in person at a cafe in the city center. I arrived early, as I always do. The place was modern and bright, with big windows and hanging plants. I chose a small table near the wall so I could see the entrance. Luke arrived with Jenna beside him. She had a careful appearance, as if every piece of clothing and every detail was chosen for effect. She smiled at me and held out her hand. I noticed her perfume before anything else, light but sharp. We sat. Luke talked a lot, telling stories from his job, from nights out, from office events. Jenna watched him with a look that made him stand straighter. When she spoke, it was to ask me polite questions about my work, my house, and my plans for retirement. At first, I thought it was just interest. Many young people ask older people about their plans. After coffee, the topic shifted to the future. Luke said he wanted to move out of his shared apartment. He spoke about living with Jenna, about having a place that felt grown up. Jenna nodded and said that renting felt like throwing money away. She mentioned, in a calm tone, that some families help young couples with their first real home. She added that some parents see it as a symbolic gift, a way to support a new start. I said that every family was different and that I had worked many years to keep my house. I did not promise anything. I only said that we could talk in the future. I saw a small shadow pass over Jenna's face, but it was gone quickly. Luke did not notice it. He was still dreaming about new furniture and a balcony. Time passed. Their relationship grew. Luke moved into a larger rented apartment with Jenna, in a building closer to the center. Suddenly he needed help with a new deposit, with moving costs, with a better car to match his new image. Each time he called, I opened my online bank and moved a sum. I told myself that these were one-time things. They never were. The first time I had dinner at Jenna's parents' house, I saw where some of her thinking came from. Their suburban home was tidy and carefully decorated. The table was set as if for a special visit, even though, as Carol said, this was just a simple family meal. There were candles and heavy cutlery, and Greg poured wine like a host who enjoys his role a little too much. From the start, the talk was about success. Carol spoke about who had recently bought a bigger house, who had changed their car, who had renovated their kitchen. Greg talked about his business, about clients and deals. When the talk reached Luke and Jenna, it was about their plans, where they wanted to live, what district felt right, which buildings had the right status. At some point, Carol turned to me and asked why I still lived alone in my house. She said it must feel big and quiet. Then she said it would be so meaningful if that house could help the next generation start well. She used the word pass in a casual tone, as if she was talking about passing the salt. I answered that my house was important to me, that it was the place I had built with my wife. I said I wanted to stay there as long as I could. I added that I would always support Luke as much as I was able, but I did not agree to anything more specific. Greg raised his eyebrows, smiled, and said that time would tell. He said children needed help, and that sometimes parents had to be creative. The tone was light, but the meaning was clear. After that night, I went back home and sat alone in my living room. The house was quiet. I looked at the picture of my wife on the wall, the one taken in our kitchen many years ago, flour on her hands and a tired smile on her face. I told her in my mind that people now talked about our house as if it were just a prize to claim. I wondered if I was being too rigid, or if I was the only one still seeing it as something more than money. I walked to the small cabinet against the wall. Inside was a metal box with a simple lock. I took it out and carried it to the table. Inside the box were the old paper copies of the mortgage records, the final letter from the bank when we had finished paying, the insurance papers, and some notes with my own calculations. There was also a folder with Luke's name written on it in my wife's hand. She had made that folder when he was still a teenager, for school records and small things related to his future. I opened it, looked at the neat handwriting, and then closed it again. I did not take anything out. I only placed the folder carefully back in the box and returned the box to its place. I told myself there was still time, and that I did not have to decide anything yet. The pressure did not stop. If anything, it grew. When Luke and Jenna announced their engagement, there was an evening in a downtown restaurant to celebrate. It was a place with dim lights, loud music, and photographs on the walls. Greg stood up during dessert and made a long speech about love and support. He talked about how proud he was, how happy he was to see his daughter with a man who had a strong foundation at home. While he spoke, his eyes kept sliding toward me. Then he joked, in front of everyone, that some fathers hold on to their houses too long, and that it takes a wedding to loosen their grip. People laughed. I smiled weakly. Greg added that in their circles, it was common for parents to give real estate as a wedding gift, so that young couples could focus on their careers and children. Some of the guests nodded, as if this were simple common sense. Luke sat beside Jenna, his arm on the back of her chair. He looked happy, a little nervous. When Greg mentioned the house directly and said that everyone knows, I will do the right thing, my son did not correct him. His eyes flicked to mine for a second and then slid away. He raised his glass with the others and drank. On the way home that night, Luke called me. He said Greg liked to exaggerate and that I should not feel pushed. He said nobody wanted to force me and that they were just dreaming out loud. But in the same call, he also talked about schools for future children, about how it would be easier to move if they had a house in their names. His voice was hopeful, full of pictures he had already drawn in his head. I listened, said that I needed time, and hung up. My chest felt tight. I recognized the pattern from my work days when clients would say one thing in a meeting and another thing in an email. Friendly on the surface and very firm underneath. Pressure wrapped in smiles. The group chat they made for both families did not help. Photos of wedding dresses, menus, decorations, and honeymoon ideas filled the screen. Mixed in were small lines from Carol and Greg, comments about bringing the house to life, and the new family home. They tagged me in some of these messages, with little smiling symbols, as if that made it light. Jenna replied often, saying how excited she was for their place. Luke added short messages with hearts and thumbs, but never once wrote that nothing was decided yet. Each time I saw my name connected to the word house in those messages, it felt like the walls of my own home moved a little further away from me. One evening, a few months before the wedding, there was another dinner at Jenna's parents' home. This time there were more people. Cousins, a few work friends, and neighbors. The table was full. During the main course, Greg tapped his glass with his knife until people fell quiet. He announced that he wanted to say a few words about the future. He spoke about how important stability was for a young couple. He said that Jenna and Luke were lucky because they had strong families behind them. Then he told the room that not every couple had the chance to start their life in a real house, but that his daughter was blessed because her future father-in-law was already preparing to hand over his keys. The room reacted with happy sounds. Some people clapped. Someone at the far end called out that this was a real gift. Carol smiled at me across the table, as if expecting me to stand up and confirm everything. Jenna leaned into Luke's side and laughed softly. Luke did not look at me right away. I felt heat rise slowly in my neck. My fingers pressed into the edge of the tablecloth. For a moment, I thought about standing up and saying that nothing had been decided, that this was my house, that people should stop speaking about it as if it were a wrapped present. But I saw Luke's face, pale and tense, and I saw Jenna's parents watching me, waiting to see if the quiet older man would dare to break the moment. I did not make a scene. I only said, in an even voice, that I wished Luke and Jenna a safe and honest future. People took that as agreement, even though I had not promised anything. As the laughter and talk started again, I looked at my son. At last, he lifted his eyes to mine. For 1 second, our gazes met. There was something like guilt there, and also fear. Then he looked down at his plate and pretended to adjust his fork. In the middle of all the noise, with glasses clinking and chairs moving and people talking about colors and furniture, I heard my own name tied to the house as if the matter were closed. It was spoken as a fact, not as a question. That was the moment when I understood that, for them, my silence had already become a promise. After that dinner where Greg spoke about my keys as if they were already wrapped in paper, something inside me shifted, but I still tried to pretend life was normal. That was my mistake. When you ignore small cracks for too long, they do not disappear. They grow. The months before the wedding became a long line of events and errands. Tuxedo fittings, menu tastings, visits to the venue. I was useful for the practical parts. I drove people, carried bags, paid invoices. I knew how to make lists and keep things on schedule. It was my nature to help. One Saturday, Jenna invited me to join her and Carol at the bridal salon. She said they wanted my opinion. I did not think they really needed it, but I went. I thought it might be nice to see the dress and feel more included. The salon was on the second floor of a narrow building in the center. Inside, everything was bright white and soft beige. There were long mirrors, racks of dresses, and a smell of fabric and perfume. Jenna stood on a small platform while a worker pinned the dress at the back. Carol sat in an armchair, legs crossed, phone in hand. I sat on a simple chair near the wall. I kept my hands on my lap and tried not to look out of place. Jenna turned in front of the mirror, studying herself. She asked what I thought. I said she looked elegant, that Luke would be proud to see her walk toward him like that. That was the honest truth. Then the talk moved, as it usually did, to plans. Carol asked about the guest list, about which relatives would come from my side, about who would stay in hotels and who would not. She turned to me and asked again about my house. She wanted to know when I would make the official announcement about it. She said guests love it when there is a surprise gift. She suggested I could stand up during the reception and say that I was giving the newlyweds a house. She spoke as if she were directing a show. I said, in a calm tone, that help could take many forms. I said not every gift had to be public. I also said I was still thinking about what I could do without putting myself in a bad position later. Carol did not like that answer. She told me that older people sometimes hold on to things because of fear. She said young couples need help now, not someday. Jenna stayed on the platform, quiet, but I could see her eyes in the mirror. She was listening closely. After a while, the worker asked them to go to another room to adjust the dress. I said I would wait. As they walked off, I heard Jenna say something in a low voice to her mother. I did not catch every word, but I heard enough to know the tone. She said that I would break if pushed in the right way because I was too gentle and hated conflict. She also said it was only a matter of choosing the right pressure. I sat still, as if I had not heard. The worker moved around me, carrying hangers. I stared at the floor and let her words sink in. For a long time, I had told myself that they were just excited, that their talk about the house was careless, not cruel. Now I heard something else. This was not only about hope, it was about strategy. A few weeks later, there was the official engagement party in the downtown restaurant, the same place with dim lights and photographs on the walls. This time, there were even more people. The noise was thick, made of music, laughter, and the clatter of plates. I sat near the middle of a long table, between some of my distant relatives and two of Jenna's friends. The dishes came and went. Toasts rose and fell. I watched Luke and Jenna at the far end of the table, surrounded by faces, posing for photos and smiling for cameras. They looked like a perfect pair on the surface. Then Greg stood up again. He tapped his fork against his glass until the room softened into silence. He spoke about love and support, about how families must stand behind the couple. He used phrases that sounded noble. He said that when two people join, the families join too. I felt some of the guests look at me as he spoke. Then he did what he seemed to enjoy most. He turned the topic to real estate. He talked about how a good home is the base of any strong family. He said that, in their circle, parents understand this and act on it. He looked straight at me as he said that some fathers give more than words. He told the room that he admired me because, in his understanding, I was getting ready to give Luke and Jenna more than anyone expected. He said I was preparing to put them into a house, the kind of house that only a lifetime of hard work can buy. People started to clap again. Some looked at me with open approval, as if I had just done something generous. Others simply assumed it was true. A few of Luke's friends made comments about how lucky he was. Luke raised his glass and smiled, but his eyes did not meet mine. I felt a dry feeling in my mouth. My tongue stuck to my teeth. I reached for my glass of water and took a slow sip. I wanted, very much, to say out loud that this was not decided, that I had never promised such a gift. But I also knew that if I did it in that moment, it would crush Luke in front of everyone. He would see me as the man who broke his image at his own engagement party. So I did something that later made me ashamed. I stayed seated and stayed quiet. After the applause faded, someone at the table asked me if I had any words. I said that I wished the couple patience and honesty as they built their life. Again, people took it as a sign that everything Greg said was true. I could feel the rope sliding tighter around my neck, made from my own politeness. That night, when I returned home, the house felt different to me. I did not just see the walls and the furniture. I saw other people's hands reaching for the keys in their minds. I saw the way my silence had been filled with their expectations. I did something I had not done in years. I went straight to the garage at the back of the house. It was both a workspace and storage, with tools on hooks, boxes stacked against the wall, and a small desk under a weak lamp. Dust floated in the beam of light when I turned it on. In the corner was the metal box. I took it down, placed it on the desk, and opened it. The smell of old paper rose up, mixed with the smell of oil and metal. I took out the folder with Luke's name on it and opened it. Inside were old school reports, a copy of his birth certificate, some letters from his early years, and a few other documents. On the top page, in my wife's handwriting, were the words, "For Luke's future." I traced the letters with my finger. Under those papers, I placed my other documents, recent property statements, insurance letters, tax summaries. I did not read each one in detail that night. I only gathered them into one stack and slid them under the older pages. For the first time, I looked at the folder not as a symbol of simple love, but as a tool, something that could protect Luke and me, or be used against us, depending on how I handled it. I closed the folder and left it on the desk instead of hiding it back in the box. I pulled out a small notebook from the drawer and wrote the date on the first page. Then I wrote a short line. Engagement dinner. Greg said I will give them my house. The room accepted it as fact. I did not correct him. The letters were slow and stiff at first, but once I started, I felt a strange relief. My work life had always taught me that if you do not write things down, they become soft and open to argument. If you have dates, times, and words, you have a structure. You can stand on it later. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and left the folder on the desk. I wish I could say that this was the moment when everything changed. In truth, I still tried to hope that things would calm down. I told myself that after the party, maybe they would focus on other parts of the wedding. Maybe the talk about the house would stop. It did not. It changed shape. Near the end, a few weeks before the big day, there was another visit to Jenna's parents' house. This time it was just a small dinner. Jenna, Luke, her parents, and me. The mood was more controlled, but under it I felt something sharp. We sat in the same dining room as always. The lights were soft. The table was set with care. At first the talk was about invitations and seating plans. They discussed where to put certain relatives, who should sit near the band, who might need a quieter corner. It sounded normal. After dessert, Carol asked Luke to help her in the kitchen. She said she needed him to carry something from the garden shed. Greg stood up too and went to take a call in another room. Suddenly I was alone with Jenna at the table. She folded her hands and looked at me in a calm way. She said that we had to talk like adults. I felt a small, cold line form in my stomach. She started by thanking me again for all my help. She listed the invoices I had paid. She said she knew about the deposits, the extra transfers, the costs I had quietly covered. Then she said that all of this was the start, not the main support. She said her parents were worried. She claimed that they thought I might pull back at the last minute. She said it was unfair to leave things unclear because they were already making plans based on what they believed I would do. I told her, in a slow, even voice, that I had never promised to give my house away. I said I would always help my son, but that my home was the place I had built with his mother, and I intended to live there. I said that if I helped them with housing, it would be in a way that did not leave me without options. Her face did not move much. She listened, nodded, and then said something that made the air feel heavy. She said that in every story, people tend to believe the person who seems weaker and more fragile. She said that older men with simple lives are easy targets for suspicion. She said that if there was ever a conflict, people would likely think I was the one at fault. Then she told me, very calmly, that she knew how to tell stories that would make people look at me differently. She did not use crude words. She did not describe details. She simply said that she could talk about feeling unsafe near me and about moments when I had crossed lines in private. She said there were many ways to describe a look, a touch on the arm, a quiet moment in a room. She said she could shape these small things into something bigger if she needed to. She added that once a story like that started, it would be hard to erase. She said my name would come up with questions. She said that even if nothing was proven, the doubt would stay. She said my son would be torn, but that people would expect him to stand with her, the mother of his future children. She said the easiest way to avoid all this would be for me to make the house transfer clear and generous. I sat and listened. My heart did not race, but it felt as if someone had reached inside and squeezed it slowly. I looked at her face, at the careful makeup, at the calm mouth that formed these sentences. She did not look angry, she looked focused. In that moment, a line inside me finally snapped, not in a loud way. There was no explosion. It felt more like a wire that had been stretched too long, finally giving up. I realized she saw me not as a person, but as leverage. She saw my fear of shame and my love for Luke as tools she could use. She believed I would fold because I wanted peace. She believed that the idea of people whispering about me would be enough to make me hand over everything. I did not answer in detail. I only said that I understood what she wanted and that I had heard her clearly. I said that I did not agree with her method and that I would think about my response. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat and calm. When I went home that night, I did not sit in the living room. I did not look at the photo on the wall. I went straight to the garage, turned on the lamp, and sat at the desk. The folder with Luke's name still lay there, where I had left it after the engagement dinner. I opened the notebook and wrote down what Jenna had just told me, as accurately as I could remember. I wrote the date, the place, who else was in the house, how they had left the room, and the phrases she used. I wrote until my hand hurt. Then I put the notebook inside the folder along with the other documents and closed it. I did not put the folder back into the metal box. I left it in the center of the desk, where I would see it every time I walked into the garage. When I turned off the lamp, the room fell into shadow, but the shape of the folder was still there in my mind. A simple rectangle on an old desk, quietly waiting. The night after I wrote down Jenna's words in my notebook, I slept very little. My mind kept moving in slow circles. I saw my house, the dining room at her parents' place, Luke's face at the engagement party, and the narrow corridor in the church that still waited in the future. By morning, I understood one thing clearly. If I stayed alone with this, I would lose. Fear moves faster when it has no witness. So I called my younger sister, Nora. We met in the city park near the small lake. It was a place where we used to bring our children when they were small. Now the benches were mostly filled with older people and parents with strollers. The trees were starting to open their leaves. The air was cool, but the sun was bright. Nora arrived with a big scarf wrapped around her neck and a paper cup of tea in her hand. She hugged me, looked up at my face, and said I seemed tired. I told her that the wedding planning was heavier than I had thought. She laughed and said that big events often were. We walked for a while along the path around the lake. Ducks moved on the water. A child threw bread pieces from the shore. For a few minutes we spoke about simple things. Her work as an accountant, her grown children, some news about an old neighbor. I waited until the noise in my head calmed a little, then I told her I needed real advice. We sat down on a bench. The wood was cold through my coat. I told Nora, step by step, what had happened over the last year. I told her about the first dinner at Jenna's parents' home, about the talk in the cafe, about the engagement party. I told her about the dinner where Greg said I was ready to hand over my keys and about how I had stayed quiet. Then I told her about the small dinner when she and Luke had gone to the kitchen and the phone call had pulled Greg away, leaving me alone with Jenna. I described the way Jenna had thanked me, listed my help, and then spoke about how people believe the person who seems fragile. I told Nora how Jenna had said she could tell stories that would make me look like someone who could not be trusted in private moments. I did not repeat every phrase. I could not, but I made the weight of them clear. Nora listened without interrupting. At some point she put her cup down on the bench beside her, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I saw anger in her face, but she kept her voice controlled when she spoke. She said that what Jenna had done was not just unkind, it was a form of pressure. She refused to use softer words. She said I had to see it as serious. She reminded me of an old project I had told her about years ago. When a client tried to claim that we had missed deadlines, she remembered how I had defended my team by showing clear records of dates, weather reports, and signed documents. She said I had not shouted then, I had simply put facts on the table. She said that this situation, in a way, was similar. Feelings were strong, but facts still existed. Then she did what I had secretly hoped she would do. She told me I did not have to handle this alone. She said I should speak to someone who knows about property, documents, and what can be done when someone uses threats to push another person into giving away assets. She reminded me of Mr. Patel, my old colleague who had become a property lawyer. I told her that he had sent me a message on the day of the church ceremony in the future I had not yet reached in this part of the story. I told her that it felt like a sign. She said it was more likely the result of my old habit of planning. She said I had probably planted the idea years ago. She was right. After my wife passed away, I had once asked Mr. Patel in passing about wills and property. We had planned to talk more, but life had gotten busy. Now, it seemed, that conversation needed to happen. Before we left the park, Nora asked me to do one more thing. She told me to keep writing in the notebook. She said that even small details mattered. Dates, places, who was present. She said that if people later tried to change their words, my notes would help show the pattern. I promised her I would. 2 days later, I sat in a small waiting room in an old building near the center. The sign on the wall listed several offices: dentists, a travel agency, and at the end, a small firm of lawyers. Mr. Patel's name was on the plaque. When he opened his door and saw me, his face softened. He had more gray in his hair than the last time I had seen him, but his eyes were the same: direct, steady, careful. He offered me a seat in his office, which was lined with shelves full of folders and books. There was a plant in the corner that looked like it had seen many years of quiet conversations. I did not give him every detail. I did not speak about the most unpleasant pictures in my mind. I simply described the pressure I had felt about my house, the public comments, and the private suggestion that someone might tell harmful stories if I did not give in. He listened with the patience of someone used to hearing people's worries about property and family. Then he explained, in simple terms, what could be done. He told me that I had full rights over my house. He said that nobody could force me to give it away. He also said that if I wanted to help Luke in the future, there were ways to do it that would not leave me without security. He talked about different forms of agreements, about conditions, about how property can be shared or protected. He spoke about written statements and the value of dated notes. He also told me something that stayed with me. He said that people who use threats often count on silence. He said if someone knows you are quietly writing down what happens and are ready to show it in the proper place, their power shrinks. We did not finish everything that day. He asked me to bring certain documents the next time: proof of ownership for the house, copies of earlier mortgage letters, some bank summaries. He said he would look at them and see what structure might be right if I chose to act. When I left his office, I felt a new kind of weight, not the heavy, helpless kind, but the serious weight of a plan forming. The next step was the bank. I booked a meeting with a manager I had seen before for simple matters. She greeted me politely in a small glass-walled room with a computer, 2 chairs, and a stack of forms. I told her I wanted to review how my accounts were set up. I said I was preparing for retirement and wanted to be sure that nothing large could move without my clear consent. She explained what controls were possible. We changed some settings. Large transfers would now require extra steps and verification. We canceled one planned automatic transfer that I had set up for wedding costs. I kept it calm and formal, speaking as any older client might. I did not mention Jenna or her parents. It was none of the bank's business. But I walked out knowing that it would now be hard for anyone to pressure me into sending large sums quickly. Back in my garage office, I pulled the notebook closer and wrote down what I had done. I made a list: talk in the park with Nora, visit to Mr. Patel, bank meeting. Under each heading, I wrote dates and a short summary. Then I opened the family group chat on my phone. There were more messages now than anyone could read with full attention. Photos of flowers, screenshots of song lists, comments about seating, questions about dress codes. In between, I started to notice a different kind of line. Carol had written that she could not wait to see the moment when I make the big house announcement. Greg had replied that he would bring an extra bottle of wine for that toast. Jenna had added that she was so grateful I would make their start secure. She used a smiling symbol and a small house picture next to it. Each message by itself was just a sentence. Together, they looked like a pattern. I scrolled back further and saw jokes about me being a hero for giving up my quiet life so that the young couple could live in comfort. My name was mentioned again and again next to the word house, often by people who had never spoken to me directly about it. Slowly, I started to take screenshots. I saved them into a separate folder on my phone. Later that night, I printed some of them out on my old home printer. The paper came out warm and slightly curled. I wrote the date in the corner of each page with a pen. Then something unexpected happened. In the middle of a long chain of messages about the menu, Jenna posted a voice note to the family group. It was short. The small play symbol blinked on the screen. My thumb hovered over it. I tapped. Her voice came out clear, sharper than usual, as if she had recorded it in a small room. She was angry. She said she was tired of waiting for me to confirm the house. She said I was dragging my feet and that I needed a push. Then, in a tone that made my shoulders tense, she said she would just have to make him scared enough, and that she knew how to tell a story that would make everyone take her side. Before the note ended, there was another voice in the background, maybe one of her friends, laughing and saying something about older men who panic when their names come up in the wrong context. Jenna laughed too and said that some pressure never fails. Then the note cut off. My first instinct was to feel my stomach twist. My second was to press the small 3 dots next to the message and save the file. My phone allowed me to store it. A few seconds later, the voice note disappeared from the chat. A new message appeared from Jenna, saying she had sent something to the wrong group. She added a joke about being clumsy with her phone. Nobody commented. But I had already saved it. I sat at my desk and connected the phone to my computer. I moved the file into a new folder and copied it to a small USB drive from the top drawer. I labeled the drive with a piece of tape and a short note. Then I printed the chat around the voice note and wrote the time and date on the printout. I placed the USB drive and the printed page into the folder with Luke's name. I also added a line about this in my notebook. As I closed the cover, my computer woke up and the screen lit the room. A small window appeared in the corner. It was my digital calendar. A reminder popped up in bright letters. Meeting. Patel. House papers. 1 week before wedding. The date was circled in color on the screen. I watched the little box blink, and for the first time in a long while, I felt that the day of the wedding might not be only theirs. It might also be the day when I stopped being the silent man people thought they could push without limit. The week before the wedding felt like a long, narrow bridge. I knew once I reached the other side, something would break, either in me or around me. The calendar reminder from my computer stayed in my mind, the meeting with Mr. Patel about the house papers. On the appointed day, I took the folder with Luke's name, my notebook, and a separate envelope with the main property documents. I placed them all in a simple canvas bag and left the house early. The sky was gray but clear. The city moved in its normal rhythm. Buses, bicycles, people rushing to work. I walked slower than most, but inside I felt a clear line pulling me forward. Mr. Patel's office was the same as before. Narrow hallway, dark green carpet, door with a small sign. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a quiet look that told me he knew I was not here for simple questions anymore. We sat at his desk. I took out the envelope and the folder and placed them in front of him. He opened them with the care of someone who respects paper as much as words. He studied the property records, flicked through my notes, and paused at the page where I had described the dinner alone with Jenna. He did not ask me to repeat everything. My notes were clear enough. He only asked a few short questions, whether anyone else had heard similar things, whether there were other messages, whether I had shared this with someone I trusted. I told him about Nora and the group chat and about the voice note I had saved to the USB drive. He nodded slowly. Then he leaned back and said we would take 2 paths at once. The first path was simple protection. He explained that we could sign documents that made my wishes clear about the house, where I would live, what would happen after I could no longer live there, and how any support to Luke would be structured. He used calm, precise words. He said these papers would not be about punishing anyone, but about making sure no one could say later that they had rights simply because they expected them. The second path was about Trace. He suggested we write a short statement describing the pressure I had experienced, with dates and places, and that we store it together with copies of my notes and printed chat messages in a sealed envelope held at the courthouse. If anyone later tried to spread harmful stories about me to coerce property, there would be a record ready to be opened. He stressed that this was not to start a fight. It was a safeguard. We worked together on the statement. He asked me to speak slowly while he typed. It was strange to hear my own experiences turned into plain, formal sentences. There were no dramatic adjectives, no heated descriptions, just facts. Who said what, where, and when. At the end, the statement mentioned that I had decided to protect my house and name through legal means only. When he finished, he printed the text and slid it across the desk. I read each line. It was simple and clean. It did not exaggerate anything. I signed at the bottom with a hand that felt steadier than I expected. Then we talked about the next step, a visit to a notary in the courthouse building to sign the house documents. Mr. Patel had already arranged the time. We gathered the property records, my ID, the new papers he had drafted, and walked together to the courthouse. The courthouse lobby was busy, full of people moving in and out with folders and bags. The air smelled of paper, old stone, and faint cleaning fluid. We waited on a bench until a clerk called my name and led us to a small room with a large wooden table and a few plastic chairs. The notary was a woman with short hair and round glasses. She checked my documents, asked a few standard questions to be sure I understood what I was signing, and then slid the papers toward me. I saw my name printed at the top and in the middle of several paragraphs. I did not need to know every legal term. Mr. Patel had explained the structure earlier, My house would remain firmly in my control. Some future benefit for Luke was written in, but under clear conditions, and no other person was named. I took the pen and signed where she pointed. My signature looked a little different each time, but it was still mine. She stamped the papers with a heavy stamp that made a dull sound on the table. The ink mark spread on the page, official and final. Then Mr. Patel handed her the statement we had prepared, along with the envelope that contained copies of my notes and some printed messages. The notary confirmed that the envelope would be sealed and held, to be opened only under certain conditions. I watched as she pressed the seal onto it and wrote a file number on the front. When we left the room, my shoulders felt both tired and lighter. It was as if I had slowly put down a load I had carried alone for too long. Outside the courthouse, Mr. Patel shook my hand again. He reminded me that what we had done did not attack anyone. It only protected me and set clear boundaries. He told me that if I faced any new pressure or strange accusations, I should not argue in private. I should simply direct people to the proper channels. I thanked him. In the days that followed, the wedding preparations sped up. The family group chat was as busy as ever. I did not answer every message, but I read them all. I noticed that Jenna mentioned the house less often now, at least in the group. She focused on details, flowers, music, timing. Greg and Carol still dropped small hints. But I no longer felt the same sting when I saw them. I had my own structure now, one they knew nothing about. A few days before the wedding, Luke called me late in the evening. He sounded tired and a little anxious. He talked about last-minute changes, about the photographer, about the forecast. Then, after a pause, he asked me quietly if I was planning something big for the reception. I asked him what he meant. He hesitated. Then he said he had heard his future in-laws talk many times about a house announcement. He said guests had expectations. He did not know exactly what they thought, but he was afraid of some kind of scene if those expectations were not met. His words told me more than he realized. It meant his future in-laws had pulled him into the narrative, but not given him full details. He was nervous, trying to keep peace between two sides he did not control. I asked him a simple question. Had he, at any point, asked me directly to give him my house as a gift? He was quiet for a moment, then he said no. He said he had assumed I would do something big, because everyone talked that way. I told him that assumptions were not the same as agreements. Then I said I would speak at the reception, but that my words would be about honesty and support, not about surprise gifts that had never been promised. I heard his breath catch. He started to say something, stopped, and then said he trusted me. I could tell he did not fully understand what that meant, but it was enough. The day before the wedding, I checked into a small hotel near the church and the reception venue. I did not want to rush on the morning itself. The room was simple. A narrow bed, a small desk, a chair, and a window that looked onto the side street. I hung my suit on the back of the door and laid out my shirt, tie, and shoes in a neat line. On the desk, I placed a smaller version of the folder. Mr. Patel had made copies of the most important documents. My statement, the note about the sealed envelope at the courthouse, and a short letter addressed to Jenna's parents, explaining my decisions in polite, firm language. The originals were already safe. These were only for reference. I also placed the USB drive on the desk and checked that the voice note file still opened and played. Jenna's own words filled the quiet room for a few seconds, then I stopped it. I did not need to hear it again. I only needed to know it was there. Before I went to sleep, I put the USB drive and the copied papers into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. I slid my notebook into the same pocket. It made the jacket hang a little heavier, but I found the weight comforting. It was like wearing a quiet shield. On the morning of the wedding, I dressed slowly. My hands moved in careful, small motions, buttoning the shirt, tightening the tie, smoothing the jacket. I checked the inner pocket twice. The folder's edge sat pressed against my chest. At the church, the ceremony unfolded, as I have already told. Jenna spoke to me in the corridor, made her threat, and walked away to begin her formal life with my son. I sat in the second row, watching, feeling both pain and a growing steadiness. After the ceremony, guests spilled out onto the church steps, took photos, threw small flowers, and then started to head to the hotel where the reception would happen. The air buzzed with good wishes and the sound of car doors closing. I walked alone most of the way, letting the crowd move ahead of me. The hotel lobby was busy when I arrived. Staff rushed back and forth with trays and lists. Guests checked in and left bags. There was a bar area with high stools and soft music playing. Luke and Jenna stood near the entrance to the banquet hall, greeting people as they came in. Carol and Greg hovered close, like hosts. I went up to them, hugged my son, and shook Greg's hand. Carol kissed my cheek and made a comment about how all of this would be worth it once they were settled in their place. Jenna smiled at me with bright, confident eyes, as if the corridor talk had never happened. At a pause in the flow of guests, I stepped aside with Nora and Luke's friend Eric, the best man. I told them I wanted them to record my speech on their phones. Nora asked why. I said I wanted a clear memory of this day, including my own words. Eric laughed and said he was already planning to record some toasts. He raised his phone and joked that I would go viral. I did not laugh, but I thanked him. The doors to the banquet hall opened. People went in, found their seats, adjusted their clothes. The room was decorated with white cloth, soft lights, and tall flower arrangements. A DJ tested the sound system, sending short bursts of music across the tables. I sat at the main family table on Luke's side. My place card was neat, my cutlery straight. The weight in my inner pocket was still there, firm and real. I rested my hand briefly against my chest, feeling the outline of the folder and notebook through the fabric. The DJ tapped the microphone and asked for attention. The music lowered to a soft background. He welcomed everyone, cracked a small joke, and then announced that, later in the evening, the groom's father would give a special toast. As the room applauded, I felt Jenna's eyes on me from across the table. I did not look away. Under the sound of clapping hands and the hum of the DJ's voice, I quietly tapped the inside of my jacket once, just enough to feel the papers shift slightly against my palm. When the main dishes were cleared and the first toasts faded, the DJ asked for attention again. He said the groom's father would now speak. The room clapped. Phones were lifted. I saw Nora raise hers. Eric did the same. Many others followed without being asked. I stood up slowly. My knees felt their age, but my back stayed straight. I took the microphone and thanked everyone for coming. I spoke first about Luke as a child, his patience with puzzles, his habit of taking apart toys to see how they worked. I said I hoped he would now treat his marriage with the same careful hands. Then I turned to the topic nobody expected. I said that, in the months before this day, I had felt strong pressure to give my house away. I said there had been public talk of it as if it were already promised. I added that, in private, I had also heard that harmful stories about me might be used if I did not agree. The room grew quiet. Cutlery stopped. Faces turned. I said I could not let my name be used in that way. I said I had written down what had happened, spoken to a lawyer, and signed papers to protect my home and my dignity. I told them that a sealed envelope with dates, notes, and printed messages was already at the courthouse. Then I reached into my jacket and took out the small USB drive. I asked the DJ in a calm tone to play one short file through the speakers. He hesitated, then connected it. The hall heard Jenna's voice from the family chat, talking about making me afraid and using a story to push me. Her own words filled the space that had been filled with music minutes before. I watched her parents. I saw shock harden into something like panic. I saw Luke's face lose its color. He stared at Jenna as if seeing a stranger. I said, into the same microphone, that from this moment I would not pay another cent toward this event or any house tied to this engagement. I said my support for my son would continue in other ways, but never again through fear. Then I put the microphone down on the table, felt the folder press against my chest one last time, and walked out of the hall while the cameras were still recording and the room struggled to find its voice.